black girl was hit by Mafia boss. Then she took his fortune and his empire. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, back to our main character. Jasmine Williams stood quietly in the corner of the high-end nightclub, her eyes scanning the room. She was just another face among the crowd, a waitress doing her job. But that night, everything would change. The tall, imposing figure of Vince Moretti, the infamous Mafia boss, had just entered the venue. His presence alone commanded attention. His suit was tailored perfectly, his demeanor cold, and his reputation even colder. Jasmine had heard the stories, of course. Every woman in town knew who Vince was. Powerful, dangerous, untouchable. She tried to avoid eye contact, knowing all too well the kind of trouble men like him could cause. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. Vince noticed her almost immediately. His dark eyes locked onto hers, and in that moment, Jasmine could feel the weight of his gaze. It wasn't an innocent look. It was the gaze of a man who thought he could control everything and everyone around him. With a slight smirk, Vince made his way toward her. The music pulsed in the background, but for Jasmine, the world seemed to quiet down as he approached. "You look out of place," he said with a low chuckle, his voice smooth as velvet. Jasmine clenched her jaw, forcing herself to keep her composure. She had dealt with men like him before. They all thought they could push her around. She was used to it, but this time, something in her gut told her this encounter wouldn't be like the others. "I'm just doing my job, sir," she replied, her voice steady despite the nerves bubbling beneath the surface. Vince's smile widened, his eyes gleaming with amusement. "Well, I don't think your job involves ignoring me, does it?" he said, his voice laced with authority. Jasmine felt a surge of frustration but quickly masked it. She had worked in this business long enough to know when to fight back and when to walk away. But tonight, walking away didn't feel like an option. As he leaned in closer, Jasmine held her ground. "You're right," she said, her voice growing stronger. "My job is to serve drinks. And I don't serve men like you." Vince's expression faltered for a brief second. He wasn't used to being spoken to that way, especially by someone who was beneath him in his eyes. But before he could respond, something unexpected happened. Jasmine took a step back and in one swift motion, she reached for the tray of drinks she had been carrying and poured the contents over Vince's expensive suit. The liquid splashed across his chest, staining his pristine white shirt. The room went silent. Vince froze, his eyes wide in shock. He stood there, stunned, as everyone around him held their breath. Jasmine didn't flinch. She stood tall, her gaze unwavering. "Now, you're going to apologize for that, or you're going to regret it," she said, her voice cold and clear. Vince, still in shock, looked around the room, but no one moved. It was as if the entire nightclub had just witnessed a powerful shift in the balance of power. Jasmine was no longer the timid waitress. In that moment, she became something else, someone who wouldn't back down. Vince's jaw clenched, and for the first time, he hesitated. His reputation, his empire, everything he had built, seemed to be on the line. He opened his mouth to speak, but stopped when Jasmine's next words cut through the tension. "I know things about you," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "Things you'd prefer stayed hidden." The Mafia boss's face turned pale. For the first time in years, someone had threatened him, not out of fear, but out of strength. He stared at Jasmine, his mind racing. She wasn't just a waitress. She wasn't someone to be trifled with. She was someone who had the power to bring him to his knees. And as Jasmine turned on her heel and walked away, she knew this encounter was just the beginning. The power had shifted, and it was only a matter of time before Vince's empire crumbled, all because of one woman who dared to stand up to him. As Jasmine walked away from Vince, the weight of the moment settled in. Her chest. She had just made the boldest move of her life, and it felt like the universe had shifted in that one instant. The nightclub was still buzzing with whispers and disbelief as she disappeared into the shadows behind the bar. She could feel the eyes on her, the stares of curiosity and awe, but she wasn't fazed. In fact, she felt empowered for the first time in a long while. As the night wore on, Jasmine remained on edge, knowing Vince wasn't someone to be easily ignored. But she had made a statement, and she wasn't going to back down. The next morning, she woke up early in her small apartment, the sunlight creeping through the curtains, casting a soft glow across the room. She ran her fingers through her hair, her mind still racing from the events of the previous night. It felt surreal, like a dream. But it wasn't a dream. It was real. Jasmine had stood up to Vince Moretti, a man known for his ruthless ways, and she had walked away without breaking a sweat. The feeling of power was intoxicating, but she knew this was only the beginning. Vince wouldn't let this go. He'd come for her, and when he did, she needed to be ready. She had no illusions about how dangerous he could be, but Jasmine had something Vince didn't expect: brains, guts, and a plan. Over the next few days, she focused on one thing: gathering information. Jasmine wasn't just a waitress. That was the role she played on the surface, but beneath it, she had a mind as sharp as any CEO or Mafia boss. She had been studying Vince's operations from the shadows, taking mental notes of his connections, his dealings, and most importantly, his weaknesses. Jasmine wasn't the type to go down without a fight, and she was determined to take Vince down. But first, she needed leverage. She spent hours in the library, digging through public records, online databases, and anything she could find that would give her the edge. She knew that the key to taking down someone like Vince wasn't brute force, it was information. And Jasmine was a master at finding what others missed. Late one night, she hit the jackpot. While sifting through a stack of corporate documents, she found a series of transactions linked to Vince's hidden offshore accounts. The figures didn't match, and the numbers were suspiciously large. She also found a few shady deals involving politicians and high-ranking officials. This was the kind of information that could ruin Vince, and Jasmine had just uncovered it. It was a delicate balance, though. If she moved too quickly, she might alert Vince, or worse, his allies. But if she waited too long, someone else might uncover what she had. She made her move the next day, contacting an old friend from her past, a journalist named Karen, who had a reputation for taking down powerful people. Jasmine knew Karen could help her get the information into the right hands. It was a risky move, but it was the only one that made sense. By the end of the week, Karen had agreed to help. They met in a small cafe in the heart of the city, far from the prying eyes of Vince's associates. Jasmine handed over the documents, and Karen promised to dig deeper. But Jasmine wasn't done. She had to make sure that once the story broke, Vince wouldn't be able to cover it up. So, she began to infiltrate his organization, slowly working her way into his inner circle. It wasn't easy. Vince had a tight grip on his empire, and anyone who got too close was quickly eliminated. But Jasmine had a knack for blending in, for being unnoticed. She played the part of a loyal employee, always smiling, always doing her job. No one suspected that beneath her calm exterior, she was biding her time, waiting for the right moment to strike. And that moment was coming fast. Vince, for all his power, had no idea that the woman he had humiliated in front of his entire organization was the one who would bring his empire to its knees. Jasmine's plan was simple. She would use the very people who had been loyal to Vince to take him down. She knew the cracks in his empire were deep, and with the right push, it would all come crashing down. The following week, she found herself at the heart of Vince's operations, sitting across from him in his sleek, high-rise office. The tension was palpable, but Jasmine remained calm, her mind focused on the task at hand. Vince looked at her, a mixture of suspicion and curiosity in his eyes. "You've been quiet lately," he said, his voice cold. Jasmine met his gaze without flinching. "I've been busy," she replied, her voice steady. Vince didn't respond immediately. He studied her, trying to read her, but Jasmine had become a master at hiding her thoughts. The silence between them was thick, heavy with unspoken words. She could feel the weight of his gaze, but she didn't let it rattle her. She had worked too hard to let him intimidate her now. Finally, Vince broke the silence. "You think you can take everything I've built?" he asked, his voice low, almost amused. Jasmine leaned back in her chair, a small smile playing at the corners of her lips. "I think I already have," she said, her voice dripping with confidence. And just like that, the tables had turned. Vince Moretti, the man who once ruled with an iron fist, was now the one who was vulnerable. Jasmine had done the impossible. She had taken his fortune and his empire, and she wasn't done yet. The day after her conversation with Vince, Jasmine found herself standing in front of the tall glass building that housed his business empire. The adrenaline from the night before still pulsed through her veins, but today was different. Today, she wasn't just a waitress playing the part of a small-town girl with a big plan. She was a woman about to take control of something far bigger than herself. She had already seen the cracks in Vince's empire. His wealth, power, and control over people were impressive, but they were built on deception, manipulation, and a few too many risky deals. Jasmine knew the cracks were deep, and it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. But today, her role wasn't to tear it all down yet. It was to make her final move, the one that would ensure Vince couldn't rebuild. Walking through the marble-floored lobby of Vince's high-rise, she felt a sense of calm wash over her. It wasn't arrogance, but a quiet confidence. She knew this building, this company, and this world better than Vince ever would. She had spent weeks studying, learning everything she could about the inner workings of his operations. She had infiltrated his circle, gained their trust, and now she was in a position to finish what she had started. When the elevator doors opened to Vince's office floor, Jasmine walked out with purpose, ignoring the whispers and stares from the employees who had seen her around. She was no longer invisible. Her presence here was a statement. Vince's assistant, a young woman named Sarah, looked up from her desk as Jasmine approached. Sarah had been one of the few who had always treated Jasmine with respect, and today, Jasmine's respect for her was about to be rewarded. "Ms. Williams," Sarah said with a polite smile, "Mr. Moretti is expecting you." Jasmine gave a small nod, but her thoughts were already focused on the task at hand. She walked past Sarah's desk, the weight of her heels on the polished floor echoing in the otherwise quiet office. Vince's office was at the end of the hallway, behind a large, mahogany door. She knocked softly before entering. "Jasmine." Vince greeted her, his voice surprisingly warm, but there was an edge to it. He had been following her every move for the past few days, and now he seemed almost wary. "You've been quiet. I've been waiting to hear what you're planning next." Jasmine smiled, but it wasn't a smile of submission or fear. It was a smile of someone who had been playing the game from the beginning and was now ready to win. "I've been working on something," she said, her tone calm but firm. Vince raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed over his chest, as if daring her to explain herself. "You think you can take everything I've built?" he asked, his voice a mixture of skepticism and curiosity. Jasmine didn't hesitate. "I already have," she replied, her voice steady and full of conviction. Vince's expression shifted, just for a moment, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. He was a man who had built an empire on manipulation, on controlling people, and yet here was Jasmine, a woman he had dismissed as nothing more than a waitress, claiming she had already defeated him. The audacity of it was almost too much to believe. "You're making a mistake," he said, his voice low, a warning, but Jasmine could hear the unease creeping in. "You don't know who you're dealing with." Jasmine stepped closer to his desk, her eyes never leaving his. "Oh, I know exactly who you are, Vince. I know your weaknesses, your secrets, the lies you've told to stay on top. And now, it's all coming to light." Vince's eyes narrowed, the tension in the room palpable. He had always prided himself on his ability to stay in control, but Jasmine was throwing him off balance, and for the first time, he wasn't sure how to react. Jasmine continued, "I've already sent everything to the press. The offshore accounts, the illegal deals, everything. You can try to cover it up, but it's already out there." Vince stood up, his chair scraping against the floor as he moved around the desk. His calm demeanor had evaporated, replaced by a storm of anger and confusion. "You think you've won? You think you've beaten me?" he hissed. "This is just the beginning, Jasmine. You have no idea what you're up against." Jasmine stood her ground, not flinching, her confidence unwavering. "No, Vince," she said, her voice sharp. "You're the one who's finished. I've already taken everything you've built, and there's nothing you can do to stop it." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was thick, heavy with the weight of their confrontation. Finally, Vince spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "You don't understand. You can't take my empire from me. It's too big, too powerful." Jasmine met his gaze, her expression unwavering. "I don't need to take everything from you. All I need is for you to fall. And you will. It's only a matter of time." Vince clenched his fists, frustration and disbelief clouding his features. But Jasmine didn't wait for him to say another word. She turned on her heel and walked out of the office, leaving Vince standing there, powerless, his empire slipping through his fingers. As she stepped back into the elevator, Jasmine exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She had done it. She had taken his fortune, his empire, and now, she was ready for whatever came next. The days following Jasmine's move against Vince Moretti were filled with a tense anticipation. She had done everything she could to ensure Vince's downfall. She had exposed his secrets, spread the word to the right people, and now it was only a matter of time before his empire would crumble. The news had already started to leak, and Vince was no longer the untouchable man he once was. The shockwaves were rippling through his organization, and Jasmine could already see the cracks beginning to appear in his carefully constructed facade. But, even with all that had happened, she knew Vince wasn't going to go down without a fight. He was powerful, dangerous, and he wouldn't just let everything slip away so easily. Jasmine sat in her small apartment, staring at her phone, as the messages kept flooding in. The media had picked up on the story. The press was all over Vince's illegal dealings, his connections to corrupt politicians, and the shady business practices that had kept him at the top for so long. The pressure was mounting, and it was only a matter of time before someone made their move. Jasmine was ready for whatever came next, but even she couldn't have predicted how quickly things would escalate. It started with a phone call from Karen, the journalist who had helped her get the information to the press. "Jasmine, you need to get out of town. Now," Karen said, her voice urgent. "I've been hearing rumors. Vince has made some calls. He's coming for you." Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. She had known this was coming. Vince wouldn't go down without a fight, but she hadn't expected him to act so quickly. "I'll be fine," Jasmine replied, though she knew deep down that she wasn't. Vince's reach was far too wide, and she had made a powerful enemy. "You don't understand," Karen pressed. "Vince isn't just some mafia boss anymore. He's made connections that go all the way to the top. He's not going to let this go without retaliation. You need to get out of the city before it's too late." Jasmine's mind raced as she considered her options. She couldn't stay in the city. Vince had too many eyes watching her now. She had to disappear, but not for long. She still had work to do. She had come too far to back down now. "Where should I go?" Jasmine asked, her voice steady despite the rising panic in her chest. "Head to the coast," Karen said. "I'll give you a name, someone who can help you disappear for a while. But you need to leave tonight. Trust me. Jasmine, you don't want to be here when Vince finds out you're the one who brought him down." Jasmine hung up the phone and grabbed her bag. She didn't have time to waste. She quickly packed her things, grabbed the few important documents she had stashed away, and made her way out the door. The city was alive with activity as usual, but Jasmine couldn't shake the feeling that everything around her was about to change. She had been in control for so long, but now she was on the run. The next few hours felt like a blur as she made her way to the coast, taking all the necessary precautions to cover her tracks. She made sure to switch taxis, avoid main roads, and stay off the radar. When she arrived at the small, secluded cabin near the water, she finally allowed herself to breathe. It was far from glamorous, but it was safe, and that was all that mattered. The night was quiet, the only sound the waves crashing gently against the shore. Jasmine sat down on the porch, staring out at the water, her mind racing with thoughts of what had led her here. She had spent so much of her life waiting for something to change, and now, everything was different. She had fought against the system, against a man who had been untouchable, and she had won. But winning came with a price. Jasmine wasn't sure what would happen next. She had taken down Vince Moretti, but his empire wasn't the only thing that had fallen. The world she had known was slipping away, and the future was uncertain. As the days passed, Jasmine stayed hidden, waiting for the right moment to strike again. She knew the fight wasn't over. Vince's empire might have crumbled, but there were still forces at work, forces she couldn't ignore. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for everything she had worked for, everything she had lost. But as she sat by the water, Jasmine realized one thing. No matter how long it took, no matter how much she had to sacrifice, she would never stop fighting. She had taken down a giant, and she was ready for whatever came next. Days passed in the quiet coastal town, and Jasmine had found herself settling into an uneasy peace. She had been running, hiding from Vince's retaliation, but now it was time to move again. She couldn't afford to stay in one place for too long, not with Vince's empire still trying to regain control of what he had lost. Even though his immediate power had crumbled, the people he had left behind were still dangerous, and they wouldn't rest until they tracked her down. But Jasmine wasn't about to let that happen. She had spent years building a life for herself, and she wasn't going to let someone like Vince take that from her. The weeks she spent at the cabin were a time of reflection and planning. She knew she had to take the next step. The fight wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Vince's empire might have crumbled on the surface, but the deeper networks were still intact. He had allies, people in powerful positions, and even if he was momentarily weakened, he would find a way to claw his way back. Jasmine couldn't let that happen. She had made a promise to herself, a promise that she would never let someone like him destroy her, destroy what she had worked for. The phone call came unexpectedly. It was Karen, the journalist who had helped her expose Vince's dark dealings. Jasmine, Karen's voice crackled through the line. I've been hearing whispers. Vince is making moves again. He's not finished, not by a long shot. And there's someone else involved, someone who could bring him back. Jasmine's stomach tightened. Who? She asked, her voice steady, though her mind was already racing with possibilities. I don't have all the details yet, Karen replied. But I've heard talk of a new player. Someone who has been helping Vince behind the scenes. This person has connections to some of the wealthiest people in the world, and if they're involved, things could get worse. Jasmine took a deep breath, letting the weight of Karen's words sink in. She had hoped that once Vince was exposed, everything would be over. But there was still more to uncover, more to fight for. I need you to find out who this is, Jasmine said, her tone resolute. I'm not backing down now. I'll be in touch. The line went dead, and Jasmine put the phone down, her heart beating faster. The world she had just begun to take back was slipping through her fingers again. But this time, she wouldn't be caught off guard. She would take the fight to them. Jasmine knew she had to act fast. There was no time to waste. The first step was to get back to the city, to get closer to the heart of Vince's remaining power. She packed her things quickly, the familiar weight of her bag settling on her shoulder. Her mind was clear now. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about taking control, about ensuring that she stayed in charge of her own future. She wasn't going to be a pawn in Vince's game anymore. The city felt different when Jasmine arrived. It was bustling as usual, the streets alive with activity. But Jasmine couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She could feel the eyes on her as she walked through the familiar streets, as if Vince's network was already watching her. She had to be careful. The first lead came from an old contact, someone she had known from her past life in the financial world. The man's name was Alan, a lawyer with ties to some of the biggest names in business. Jasmine, I've been hearing about you, he said when she met him in a quiet cafe tucked away from the city's chaos. You've stirred up a hornet's nest, but I've got some information that could help you. Alan leaned in, his voice low. Vince isn't the only one you need to worry about. There's a group, a shadowy collective of people who have been working in the background for years. They've kept things quiet, out of the public eye, but they have their fingers in every pie in the city. They're powerful. Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. She had heard rumors about such a group, but she hadn't known how deep their reach was. Alan continued. If you want to take Vince down for good, you'll need to go after them too. They're the ones who kept his empire running all these years. Without them, he's nothing. Jasmine nodded slowly, taking in everything Alan had said. How do I get to them? She asked. Alan gave a small smile, as if he had expected the question. There's a gala, a high-profile event coming up. A lot of the big players will be there. If you want to get in, that's your best shot. But be careful. These people don't play by the rules. Jasmine didn't hesitate. She knew this was her chance, the opening she needed to get to the heart of Vince's remaining power. I'll be there, she said. The night of the gala arrived, and Jasmine was ready. She had spent days preparing, researching the people who would be in attendance, learning everything she could about them. She had to be careful. The last thing she wanted was to draw attention to herself. But as she stepped into the lavish ballroom, dressed in a sleek black dress that made her blend in with the crowd, she felt a surge of confidence. This was her world now. She wasn't just an outsider anymore. She was a player, and she was going to take down Vince Moretti once and for all. The gala was everything Jasmine expected and more. The grandeur of the venue took her breath away. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling. the floor gleaming under the soft light of the setting sun, and the air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and champagne. The guests mingled in high-end tuxedos and luxurious gowns, their laughter echoing off the marble walls. Jasmine could feel the weight of their gazes as she entered the ballroom. She wasn't just another guest. She was a woman with a purpose, and the purpose was clear. She had to find a way into the inner circle of the people who had supported Vince, the ones who had kept his empire standing. She knew that the information she had was powerful, but it was useless unless she could get it into the right hands. As she walked through the room, she kept her movement steady, her eyes scanning the crowd, looking for anyone who might be a part of the elusive group Alan had mentioned. The guests were all too eager to shake hands, exchange pleasantries, and show off their wealth, but Jasmine wasn't interested in their smiles or their compliments. She was here for one thing and one thing only: to find the people who could bring Vince down once and for all. It wasn't long before she spotted him, a man in his late 40s, sharp-featured with salt and pepper hair, and a gaze that seemed to see right through her. He stood near the back of the room, a drink in one hand, watching the crowd with a cool detachment that matched the elite nature of the gala. He was talking to a few people, but his posture was relaxed, like he didn't have a care in the world. Jasmine didn't recognize him immediately, but she knew from the way people treated him that he had power, real power. He was someone she needed to talk to. She made her way across the room, weaving through the crowd with practiced ease, all the while maintaining a sense of quiet confidence. She wasn't nervous. She had a plan, and she was sticking to it. When she finally reached him, she gave him a polite nod before introducing herself. "Good evening," she said, her voice smooth and steady. "I'm Jasmine Williams. It's an honor to meet you." The man looked her over briefly before offering a polite smile, his eyes sharp with curiosity. "Pleasure to meet you, Jasmine. I'm Thomas Hale. What brings you here tonight?" Jasmine didn't hesitate. "I believe we have mutual interests. I've heard your name mentioned in certain circles, and I think we might be able to help each other." Thomas's smile faded slightly, replaced with a look of interest. He studied her for a moment, as though sizing her up. "And what exactly do you think we can help each other with?" he asked, his tone measured, but there was an edge to it. Jasmine leaned in slightly, lowering her voice just enough for him to hear, but not anyone else around them. "I know about Vince Moretti," she said. Thomas's expression didn't change, but Jasmine could see the flicker of recognition in his eyes. "What about him?" he asked, his voice calm. But now there was a subtle tension behind the words. "He's finished," Jasmine said, her voice unwavering. "And if you're still working with him, so are you." Thomas didn't react immediately, but Jasmine could tell he was thinking. He glanced around the room before leaning in closer. "You're bold, I'll give you that," he said softly. "But how do you know what you're talking about?" Jasmine smiled, her confidence unwavering. "Let's just say I have my sources. I know everything about Vince's dealings, his money, his associates. You're in deep with him, and I think you're starting to realize that." Thomas's eyes narrowed slightly. He didn't seem angry, but Jasmine knew that he was weighing his options. The people around them continued to laugh and chat, but the moment between them felt like it had stretched for hours. Finally, Thomas spoke, his voice low and deliberate. "You don't know what you're getting into," he said. "Vince's empire may be crumbling, but there are others who will fill the vacuum. If you think you can just walk in and take everything he built, you're wrong." Jasmine held his gaze, her eyes steady. "I'm not interested in taking anything," she said. "I just want Vince to pay for what he's done, and I want to make sure that the people who helped him are held accountable too." Thomas studied her for a moment longer, then gave a slight nod. "And what do you expect from me?" he asked. Jasmine leaned back, her posture relaxed but her words sharp. "I expect you to help me take down the rest of Vince's network," she said. "You and your friends are the last people standing between me and the end of his reign. Either you help me, or you're part of the problem." There was a long silence between them as Thomas considered her words. Jasmine could see the wheels turning in his head, the conflict in his eyes. But she didn't flinch. She knew she had him right where she wanted him. Finally, Thomas spoke again, his voice quieter. "I don't know if you realize what you're asking," he said. "But if you're serious about this, I'll be watching you. And so will everyone else. Be careful, Jasmine. The people you're dealing with, some of them don't play by the rules." Jasmine nodded, understanding the gravity of what she was about to do. "I'm not afraid," she said, her voice steady. "And I'm not backing down. With that, Thomas gave her a brief nod and turned away, disappearing into the crowd. Jasmine stood still for a moment, letting the weight of what had just happened sink in. She had made her first move. The game had changed, and now, it was time to see if she could finish what she started. The days that followed the gala were a blur of activity for Jasmine. She had made her move, and now the pieces were starting to fall into place. But with each passing day, she could feel the tension in the air grow heavier. The more people she contacted, the more whispers she heard. There were eyes everywhere, and she knew it was only a matter of time before someone would try to stop her. But Jasmine wasn't afraid. She had come too far to back down now. The plan she had set in motion was unfolding exactly as she had hoped. She was gaining allies, and the whispers about Vince's fall from grace were getting louder. The media had started to dig deeper into the scandal. The once untouchable Mafia boss was now a man on the edge, his name being dragged through the mud as his empire crumbled around him. But Jasmine wasn't satisfied with just seeing Vince suffer. She wanted to make sure his entire network would be exposed, and that the people who had helped him would be held accountable. She knew it wouldn't be easy. The people Vince surrounded himself with were powerful, and many of them had their own agendas. But Jasmine was relentless. The first person she reached out to after the gala was Alan, the lawyer who had helped her before. He had the connections, the knowledge, and most importantly, the influence to help her get to the people who had been running Vince's operations from the shadows. Jasmine, Alan said when they spoke on the phone, I've been following the news, and it looks like things are starting to fall apart for Vince. But we both know it's not over yet. There are still people who are loyal to him, and they'll fight back. You need to be careful. Jasmine listened, taking in every word. I know, she replied, her voice steady. But I've come too far to stop now. I need you to help me get closer to the people who are still in control. I need to know who they are, what they're planning, and most importantly, how I can take them down. Alan paused for a moment before responding. You've got guts, I'll give you that. But you're playing a dangerous game. These people don't mess around. If you want my help, you're going to have to be careful. I'll set up a meeting, but I'm warning you. Things are going to get messy. Jasmine didn't hesitate. I'm ready. The meeting was set for the following week. Jasmine had to be careful. She knew Vince's network was still watching her, and she couldn't afford to slip up. The last thing she wanted was to lead anyone straight to her. She spent the next few days preparing, gathering all the information she could about the people she would be meeting. It wasn't just about exposing them. It was about taking them down, one by one, until Vince's entire empire had been dismantled. When the day of the meeting arrived, Jasmine dressed in a simple but elegant black suit. She didn't want to draw attention to herself, but she needed to look professional. She arrived early at the upscale restaurant where the meeting was set to take place. The restaurant was quiet, elegant, with soft lighting and a low hum of conversation. Jasmine sat at a corner table, keeping her eyes on the door. She had been in these situations before, waiting, watching, and calculating. But this time, it was different. This time, she wasn't the one being watched. She was the one in control. The man who walked in was tall, with a sharp, calculating look in his eyes. He was dressed in a tailored suit, his posture rigid, his every movement measured. Jasmine recognized him immediately. Victor Hale, one of the most powerful figures in Vince's network. He was known for his influence, his ability to move silently through the shadows, pulling strings and making things happen. But Jasmine wasn't intimidated. She had studied him, and she knew his weaknesses. As he approached, Jasmine stood to greet him. Mr. Hale, she said, her voice smooth but firm. It's a pleasure to meet you. Victor looked her over briefly, his expression unreadable. The pleasure is mine, Ms. Williams. I must say, I wasn't expecting someone like you to reach out to me. Jasmine smiled, but it wasn't a smile of friendliness. It was a smile of someone who had control, someone who knew exactly what she was doing. I think we both know why I'm here, she said, sitting down. Victor hesitated for a moment before taking a seat across from her. And why is that? He asked, his tone calm. But there was a hint of suspicion in his eyes. Jasmine leaned in slightly, her eyes never leaving his. I'm here because I know the truth, she said softly. I know everything Vince has been hiding. His empire is falling, and I think you're the one who's been keeping it all together. But I also know you're running out of time. People are starting to talk, and soon, it won't be just Vince you have to worry about. You'll have to answer for your part in all of this. Victor's expression shifted, his eyes narrowing. You think you can control this? You think you can take everything down just like that? He asked, his voice low. Jasmine didn't flinch. I've already taken everything down, she said. And now it's your turn. There was a long silence between them. Victor stared at her, clearly weighing his options. Jasmine knew he was calculating, trying to figure out if she was bluffing, if she really had the power to do what she said. But Jasmine didn't need to bluff. She had already won. She had the information. She had the power. And she wasn't afraid to use it. Finally, Victor spoke, his voice soft but filled with a dangerous edge. You're playing a dangerous game, Ms. Williams. But I'm impressed. I didn't think you had the guts to pull this off. Jasmine smiled, her confidence unwavering. I'm just getting started, she said. And with that, she knew the final piece of her plan had fallen into place. Vince's empire was on the verge of collapse, and she would be the one to bring it all down. As Jasmine walked out of the meeting with Victor Hale, the weight of what had just happened settled on her shoulders. She had gained crucial leverage, but the path ahead was still fraught with danger. She knew she was getting closer to taking down the last remnants of Vince's empire, but the people she was dealing with weren't easily intimidated. Victor's warning echoed in her mind. The game was far from over, and she would have to be ready for whatever came next. Her phone buzzed as she stepped into the crisp night air, the city's lights flickering around her. It was Karen, the journalist who had helped her from the beginning. Jasmine, I've got more information. I think you need to hear this. Jasmine's heart quickened. What is it? She asked, her voice steady but urgent. It's about the offshore accounts you mentioned before. I've traced them to a secondary group, a private network of financiers who've been moving Vince's money out of the country, Karen said, her voice filled with excitement. I've got the names of the people involved. Some of them are still active, and if we expose them, it could bring the whole operation down. Jasmine's mind raced. This was exactly what she needed, the final pieces of the puzzle. But there was one thing she had learned over the past few weeks. Vince's empire was far more complicated than it seemed, and every victory came with a price. I need you to send me the information, Jasmine said, her voice firm. And we'll meet soon. I'll figure out the next move. She ended the call and stood still for a moment, taking in her surroundings. The city had always felt alive to her, full of opportunities and challenges. But now, it felt like a battleground. And she was ready for the fight. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Jasmine spent her time coordinating with her growing network of allies, working in the shadows, gathering intelligence, and carefully planning her next steps. She knew that Vince was losing control, but his people were still dangerous. She had to move quickly before they could regroup. As she prepared for her next move, Jasmine realized that the time had come to confront Vince himself. She couldn't just wait for the pieces to fall into place. She needed to finish what she had started. The plan was simple. Expose the last of Vince's illegal dealings and make sure his network couldn't operate without him. She would go straight to the heart of his power, and this time, she wouldn't be the one hiding in the shadows. It was late when Jasmine finally found herself standing outside Vince's high-rise office building. The lights from the city cast long shadows on the ground, and the night air was cool against her skin. Her pulse was steady, but she couldn't help but feel the weight of what was about to happen. This wasn't just about taking down a mafia boss. It was about changing everything, about taking control of her own future. Inside the building, the familiar hum of activity buzzed in the background. Jasmine moved with purpose, her eyes scanning the room for any sign of danger. She had been here before, but tonight was different. Tonight, she wasn't going to leave until everything was settled. When she reached the top floor, she stood before Vince's office door, her heart pounding in her chest. She had no illusions about what was at stake. If she failed now, everything she had worked for would be lost. But she wasn't afraid. She had come too far to back down. She knocked firmly on the door, and when Vince's voice called out from inside, she didn't hesitate. Come in. Jasmine stepped into the room, her eyes immediately locking onto Vince, who was sitting behind his massive desk. He looked up at her, his usual smug expression replaced by something darker. For the first time, he seemed to understand that he wasn't in control anymore. You've come a long way, Jasmine, he said, his voice low, almost resigned. But this ends tonight. You've made your move, but you're not going to win. Jasmine didn't flinch. You're wrong, Vince. This has been over for a long time. You just didn't see it coming. She stepped closer, her gaze unwavering. Your empire is finished. The people you've worked with are already running for cover. And when this is all over, it's going to be you who's left with nothing. Vince's eyes narrowed, but there was no anger in them. Just cold, calculating realization. You think you can take everything from me? You've underestimated me. I still have allies, people who are loyal. You don't know what you're up against. Jasmine smiled, a small, confident smile. I've been up against everything you've thrown at me, Vince. And I've come out on top. You've lost. The silence in the room was deafening, the tension thick. Vince didn't speak, his gaze locked on hers. It was clear that he was trying to figure out what to do next. But Jasmine wasn't giving him the chance to regroup. She had already won. And with a final look, she turned and walked out of his office, leaving him behind, trapped in the empire he had built and lost. As she stepped into the elevator, Jasmine allowed herself a moment to breathe. It was over. Vince's reign had ended, and with it, the shadow that had loomed over her for so long. But this was just the beginning of her own story. She had taken down the empire that once threatened to control her life. And now, it was time for her to rise. No longer a pawn, Jasmine had become the master of her own fate. The days after Jasmine's final confrontation with Vince passed in a haze. The victory was sweet, but the aftermath was anything but peaceful. She had expected resistance, but not the kind that followed. As the dust began to settle, Jasmine found herself in a whirlwind of new problems. Vince's fall had created a vacuum, and like a wounded animal, his former allies were circling, desperate to rebuild what had been lost. The media was relentless, digging deeper into the wreckage of his empire, exposing more of the corruption, but it wasn't enough. There were still players in the game, ones who had stayed hidden in the shadows. Jasmine knew they wouldn't just disappear, not without a fight. She had hoped that taking down Vince would be the end of her struggle, but the reality was more complicated. She had dismantled the core of his operation, yes, but the network he had built was vast. There were too many people involved, too many who had their own agendas. The battle was far from over. Jasmine couldn't rest. She had to stay ahead of the game, and to do that, she needed information. The pieces were falling into place, but there were still gaps. She spent the next few weeks working tirelessly, contacting old sources, and piecing together the remaining parts of Vince's empire. The more she uncovered, the more she realized that the true power had never been in Vince's hands alone. There were larger forces at work, and Jasmine was now at the center of it all. One evening, as she was reviewing the last of the information she had gathered, her phone rang. It was Karen again. "Jasmine, we need to talk," Karen said, her voice tinged with urgency. "I've been following the leads you gave me. There's something you need to know." Jasmine felt her pulse quicken. "What is it?" she asked, already preparing herself for the worst. "There's someone else behind all of this," Karen said. "I've traced the money further than we thought. It's not just about Vince anymore. There's a much bigger player in the background. Someone with connections to global financial networks. We're talking about a level of power that you're not prepared for." Jasmine's heart sank. "Who?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "His name is James Blackwell," Karen replied. "He's a financier with ties to several international organizations. He's been funneling money through Vince's operations for years. But Blackwell isn't just some investor. He's been pulling the strings from behind the scenes. If you thought Vince was dangerous, Blackwell is in a league of his own." Jasmine sat back in her chair, processing the information. This was bigger than she had imagined. "Where is he now?" she asked. "That's the thing," Karen said. "I don't know yet. But I've got a lead. There's a high-profile meeting coming up. Blackwell will be there. If we can get to him, we can expose everything. This could be the break we need." Jasmine didn't hesitate. "Get me in," she said, her voice steady with determination. "I'll be there. Find out where and when, and I'll take care of the rest." Karen agreed, and the plan was set in motion. Over the next few days, Jasmine's focus was solely on the upcoming meeting. She knew this was her chance to take down the last piece of the puzzle. Blackwell was the key to everything, and if she could get to him, it would all be over. She spent her time preparing, studying every detail about Blackwell's background, his connections, his weaknesses. This time, she wasn't going to leave anything to chance. The night of the meeting arrived, and Jasmine found herself at a luxurious hotel in the heart of the city. The venue was exclusive, high security, and filled with the kind of people who had the power to change the world. Jasmine was ready. She was dressed in a sleek black dress, blending into the crowd effortlessly, her eyes scanning the room for any sign of Blackwell. The guests were all business executives, bankers, politicians, and other influential figures, all mingling in the lavish ballroom. Jasmine didn't waste any time. She knew that Blackwell was one of the most powerful people in the room, and she couldn't afford to miss her chance. She made her way through the crowd, her focus narrowing as she approached a small group standing near the back of the room. And then she saw him. James Blackwell stood at the center of the group, his presence commanding attention. He was tall, with sharp features and an air of superiority that made him seem untouchable. His eyes were cold, calculating, and Jasmine could see that he was used to getting exactly what he wanted. She took a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest. This was it. She had worked her entire life for this moment. She wasn't going to let it slip away. As she approached, she made sure to appear casual, confident, and unassuming. She needed to get close enough to speak to him, but not too close to raise suspicion. She waited until the group parted slightly, giving her a chance to slip into the conversation unnoticed. "Mr. Blackwell," she said, her voice smooth and controlled. Blackwell turned toward her, his eyes narrowing as he took in her appearance. "And you are?" he asked, his voice polite but distant. "Jasmine Williams," she said, offering him a professional smile. "I've heard a lot about you. I think we should talk." Blackwell studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "I'm not in the habit of talking to strangers," he said. Jasmine wasn't deterred. "I'm not a stranger," she replied. "I know everything about you, about what you've been doing behind the scenes. You've been working with Vince Moretti for years, but now his empire is gone. The question is, what happens next?" Blackwell's expression shifted ever so slightly, but Jasmine caught it. It was a flicker of surprise, of recognition. He wasn't used to people confronting him, especially not with the knowledge that she had. "You're quite bold, Ms. Williams," he said, his voice cool. "But I don't think you understand what you're dealing with." Jasmine smiled, her confidence unwavering. "I think I understand perfectly," she said. "And I think you're about to learn just how much I really know." James Blackwell's eyes flickered with the briefest hint of surprise, but Jasmine saw it. She knew he hadn't expected anyone, especially not a woman like her, to confront him with such certainty. His carefully controlled demeanor slipped for just a moment before he recovered. "You think you have the upper hand, don't you?" he asked, his tone colder than before. Jasmine didn't flinch. "I don't think," she replied, her voice steady. "I know." There was a long, charged silence between them, the weight of her words hanging in the air. The room around them buzzed with conversation, laughter, and the clinking of glasses, but Jasmine was focused solely on Blackwell. She was here to finish what she had started. Blackwell took a step back, his eyes scanning her with a new level of calculation. He was trying to gauge her, trying to decide if she was bluffing or if she really had the power to bring him down. Jasmine wasn't worried. She had the facts, and more importantly, she had the leverage. "You think I'm just a small player in this game," Jasmine continued, her voice calm but laced with authority. "But I'm the one who's been pulling the strings for the past few months. I know about the offshore accounts, the fake businesses, the deals that were meant to line your pockets. I know everything." Blackwell's expression remained unreadable, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of concern. He wasn't used to being caught off guard, but Jasmine was no ordinary opponent. "What do you want from me?" he asked, his voice suddenly low-measured. Jasmine leaned in slightly, matching his tone. "I want you to turn yourself in. I want you to help me take down the rest of your network, the people who've been hiding in the shadows. If you do that, maybe, just maybe, I'll make sure the consequences aren't as severe." Blackwell's gaze hardened. "You think I'm going to just walk away from everything I've built?" he asked, his voice rising with a hint of disbelief. "You're out of your mind." Jasmine didn't react to his outburst. "I'm not asking you to walk away. I'm asking you to face the consequences of what you've done. You've used people, manipulated them, and now your empire is crumbling. It's time for you to pay for your actions." Blackwell's fists clenched at his sides, and Jasmine could see the battle raging inside him. He had spent his life building his empire, and now he was being asked to give it all up. But Jasmine knew there was no other option for him. His time had come. "You don't understand what you're dealing with," Blackwell said, his voice tight with frustration. "I have allies, people in power. If I go down, they'll come for you too." Jasmine didn't flinch. "Let them come," she said, her voice unwavering. You're nothing without your network, Blackwell. And I've already exposed you. The people who support you are turning on you right now, as we speak. Your empire is falling apart. Blackwell's face twisted with a mixture of rage and fear. He was realizing that Jasmine wasn't bluffing. She had the evidence, and she had the power to take him down. But she wasn't finished yet. You're done, Jasmine continued, her voice calm but forceful. This is your last chance. Turn yourself in. Help me take down the rest of the people involved, and maybe you'll get a deal. But if you refuse, I'll make sure you're exposed for everything you've done. You'll never be able to hide again. Blackwell stood in silence for a moment, his mind racing. Jasmine knew he was weighing his options, trying to figure out if he could still escape, if he could still salvage anything from the wreckage of his empire. But Jasmine had already won. He was trapped. Finally, Blackwell spoke, his voice a mere whisper. You don't know what you're asking, he said, his tone defeated. You don't know what I've sacrificed, what I've built. You don't know what's at stake. Jasmine's gaze softened slightly, but her resolve remained strong. I know exactly what's at stake, she said. But it's too late for you now. The world is changing, and you're not going to be part of it anymore. Blackwell looked at her for a long time, as if trying to decide if there was another way out. But there was none. Jasmine had closed every possible escape route. Finally, with a heavy sigh, Blackwell nodded, as though he had resigned himself to his fate. Fine, he said, his voice barely audible. I'll help you, but you better keep your word. I won't go down without a fight. Jasmine stood up, her posture straight, her expression firm. You've already lost, she said. Now, it's time to pay the price. As Blackwell began to speak with her about the final details, Jasmine couldn't help but feel a sense of relief wash over her. This wasn't just the end of Vince Moretti. This was the end of everything they had built. The lies, the manipulation, the destruction. It was over. But as the pieces began to fall into place, Jasmine knew that this wasn't the end of her journey. It was just the beginning. She had taken down one of the most powerful men in the world, but she still had more to do. There was a new world to build, and Jasmine Williams was ready to take the lead. The meeting with James Blackwell marked a turning point for Jasmine, but it was only the beginning of a new phase in her plan. The days that followed were filled with more strategy, more preparation. She had made a significant move, but the pieces of the puzzle were still scattered, and the risks were far from over. As she spent her days organizing the final steps to expose the remaining players in Vince's network, she could feel the tension mounting. Every decision felt crucial, every move potentially dangerous. But Jasmine wasn't about to back down. She had come too far, and there was no turning back now. Blackwell's cooperation had opened new doors for her, but she still had to navigate the intricate web of corruption that had kept Vince's empire alive for so long. With Blackwell in her corner, the final stage of the operation was in motion. He was providing the information she needed, but Jasmine knew it would take more than just words to take down the rest of the network. She needed action, and she needed to be one step ahead at all times. One evening, as Jasmine sat in her apartment going over the details Blackwell had given her, her phone buzzed. It was Karen again. Jasmine, we've got a problem, Karen said, her voice tense. What is it? Jasmine asked, immediately alert. Blackwell's story checks out, but there's something else going on. There's a second, more secretive network. A higher level of influence we haven't touched yet. I don't think Blackwell knows the full extent of it, but someone is pulling strings from a much higher place. Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? She asked. I mean, Karen continued, the deeper we dig, the more we find that this isn't just about Vince or Blackwell. There are global players involved, people whose names we've never heard of, with ties to international politics, finance, and organized crime. If we're going to finish this, we need to go after them too. Jasmine's mind raced. She had thought she was close to the end, but now it was clear there was a bigger game at play, one that stretched far beyond the city or even the country. She wasn't just dismantling Vince's empire anymore. She was up against global forces, people whose power could reach her in ways she couldn't even anticipate. Where do we start? Jasmine asked, her voice steady despite the shock. We start by tracing the money, Karen replied. The financial trail is the key. There are offshore accounts and investments linked to some of the highest profile individuals in the world. If we follow it, we'll find the people behind this whole operation. Jasmine sat back, taking a deep breath. This was no longer just about revenge. It was about exposing an entire system, a network of power that had been operating in the shadows for years. But Jasmine had the strength to take them on. She wasn't going to let these people get away with the corruption and manipulation that had plagued so many lives. "I'll do whatever it takes," Jasmine said, her voice firm with resolve. "We're going to take them all down, starting with the money. No one is too big to be exposed." The next few weeks were a blur of research, strategy meetings, and covert operations. Jasmine knew that the people she was going after would stop at nothing to protect their secrets. But every step they took to hide the truth only made Jasmine more determined to uncover it. She worked with Karen and the other allies she had made along the way, meticulously following the financial trails, uncovering links to powerful individuals across the world. It wasn't easy. Every lead felt like a puzzle piece that only made sense once the next one fell into place. But Jasmine was patient, and she knew that the more they uncovered, the closer they got to the heart of the operation. One day, after weeks of tracking down leads, Jasmine received a call from Karen. "I've got something," Karen said, her voice barely controlled with excitement. "We've traced the money to a shell company in the Cayman Islands. It's the same network we've been following, but this company is linked to a group of politicians and business leaders across Europe and the Middle East. These are the people who've been funding Vince, and they're the ones who need to be exposed." Jasmine's pulse quickened. This was it. They had found the final piece of the puzzle. "What's the next step?" she asked, already knowing the answer. "We go public," Karen said. "We expose everything. We're ready to release the information to the press and take down the entire operation. But it's risky. If they catch wind of it before we're ready, they'll make sure it disappears." Jasmine's mind raced, but her determination remained unshaken. She had already risked everything to get this far. Backing down now wasn't an option. "We do it," she said firmly. "We go public, and we make sure they can't cover it up. They've hidden in the shadows for too long, and it's time for them to face the consequences." The next few days were a whirlwind of final preparations. Jasmine worked tirelessly with Karen and their team to ensure that the information was ready to be released to the press. They coordinated with journalists, set up secure channels for the release of documents, and ensured that every piece of evidence was irrefutable. When the day finally came, Jasmine watched as the first article hit the front page of a major news outlet. The story broke like wildfire, spreading through the media faster than they had anticipated. The global network of corruption, spanning continents and involving powerful figures, was laid bare for the world to see. Jasmine knew the fight was far from over. The people she had exposed wouldn't go down without a fight. But for the first time in a long time, Jasmine felt a sense of relief. The truth had been uncovered. And no matter what happened next, the world would never look at Vince Moretti or the people behind him the same way again. The world that Jasmine had known, the one that had been dominated by Vince Moretti and the powerful men behind him, was beginning to unravel before her eyes. The media storm that followed the exposure of the global network had created a tidal wave of public outrage, forcing politicians, business leaders, and criminal figures to answer for their involvement. For the first time in a long while, Jasmine felt the weight of the fight she had started lift off her shoulders. She had made it. Vince's empire, built on lies and manipulation, was collapsing, and with it, the power of those who had supported him for so long. But even with this victory, Jasmine couldn't shake the feeling that the battle was far from over. She had brought down the most dangerous part of the operation, but the people she had exposed were not the type to go down without a fight. Jasmine knew that retaliation was inevitable. As the days passed, the media continued to cover the story, revealing more shocking details about the people involved in Vince's empire. But behind the headlines and the public outrage, Jasmine was quietly preparing for what came next. The phone call came early one morning, just as she was reviewing the latest updates. It was Karen, her trusted ally and journalist. "Jasmine, I've been getting some disturbing reports," Karen said, her voice low and serious. "There are still powerful people who haven't been caught up in this. The public may think it's over, but there are still forces at work behind the scenes, and they're coming after you." Jasmine's heart tightened. "Who?" she asked, her voice steady but filled with urgency. "There are whispers of an underground network still operating," Karen continued. "It's a group of people who have been cleaning up Vince's mess, covering up the parts of his empire that weren't exposed. They're powerful, and they're moving fast. I don't know who they are yet, but they're on your trail. Jasmine took a deep breath, her mind racing. She had known this moment would come. She had taken down the visible threat, but she had never expected that the true power behind Vince's empire would remain hidden. Where do we start? Jasmine asked, her voice resolute. We start by tracking their movements, Karen said. They're trying to clean up what's left, and if we get to them before they can regroup, we can put an end to this for good. But we need to be careful. They're not like Vince. They're smarter, more strategic. Jasmine didn't hesitate. I'll do whatever it takes. We find them, and we expose them. It's time to finish this. Over the next few days, Jasmine and Karen worked together, meticulously piecing together every scrap of information they could find. They dug deeper into the financial connections, the hidden accounts, and the people who had helped Vince evade justice for so long. Jasmine knew that every lead they followed could bring them closer to the people who were still trying to protect the remnants of Vince's empire. They tracked movements, scanned for patterns, and spoke to anyone who might have information. But despite their efforts, they were still in the dark. The group they were after was elusive, skilled at hiding in the shadows, and always one step ahead. Jasmine couldn't afford to wait any longer. She knew that she had to take a more direct approach. The final confrontation was coming, and it was time to go on the offensive. She had learned enough to know that this group was not just another collection of corrupt individuals. They were connected to some of the most powerful entities in the world. They had resources, influence, and connections that reached beyond the borders of the country. The stakes had never been higher. We need to expose them in one fell swoop, Jasmine said to Karen one evening, her voice filled with determination. We can't afford to go after them one by one. We need to hit them hard, fast, and all at once. Karen agreed, and the plan was set in motion. They worked quickly, knowing that time was running out. They had compiled enough evidence to link the group to Vince's empire, and now they just had to make sure it reached the right hands. The information was too powerful to sit idle. It needed to be exposed to the world, and it needed to happen before the group could regroup and retaliate. The night they decided to release the final piece of their plan, Jasmine felt a surge of anticipation. The final moment had arrived. She sat in front of her computer, her fingers hovering over the keyboard, as the evidence was uploaded to the secure platform. Once the world saw what they had uncovered, there would be no turning back. The file was sent. The story was live. The truth was out. Jasmine leaned back in her chair, staring at the screen, as the first articles began to roll in. It was happening. The underground network was being exposed, and the people who had been operating in the shadows for so long were no longer safe. But Jasmine knew that the fight wasn't over. As the media storm began to take hold, the phone calls started coming in. Some were congratulatory, others more cautious, and still more were laced with threats. Jasmine didn't care. She had won. The war was far from over, but she had taken control. Vince's empire had crumbled, and now, it was time for the world to see the people who had been pulling the strings all along. The world had changed, and Jasmine Williams had become the force that changed it. The days after the release of the final piece of the puzzle passed in a whirlwind. The media had exploded with the information, stories flooding news outlets, social media, and every corner of the internet. Jasmine's plan had worked, at least on the surface. Vince's empire was crumbling faster than anyone had anticipated, and the global network behind him was starting to unravel. The people who had once been untouchable were now on the run, their secrets exposed for the world to see. Jasmine watched from the sidelines as the storm she had set in motion continued to unfold. She felt a strange sense of calm, but also a deep understanding that this was not the end. It was only the beginning. With each passing day, she could feel the pressure building. The threat started to come in from every direction. Anonymous calls, cryptic messages, and veiled warnings. They were trying to silence her, to intimidate her into backing down. But Jasmine had never been the type to back down, especially not now. The world was watching, and she wasn't going to let them win. Despite the mounting threats, Jasmine stayed focused on the task at hand. She had brought down Vince, but there were still more pieces to the puzzle. There were still people out there, powerful figures, who had escaped the net she had cast. She couldn't rest until every last one of them was exposed. It wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about ensuring that this kind of corruption never took root again. Jasmine spent the following weeks meeting with more sources, digging deeper into the remnants of the operation. She worked quietly behind the scenes, contacting allies, and carefully navigating through a web of deceit. She knew the stakes were higher than ever. The more she uncovered, the more she realized that the people she was dealing with were not just criminals. They were political powerhouses, international businessmen, and individuals with the kind of influence that reached far beyond the city or even the country. But Jasmine wasn't afraid. If anything, the danger only made her more determined. She had faced down Vince and won. She had taken on the system and torn it apart piece by piece. Now, she was ready for the final confrontation. But the closer she got, the more Jasmine realized that she couldn't do this alone. She needed help, people who shared her vision, people who could take the fight to the next level. She reached out to Karen again, this time with a clearer plan in mind. "We need to go after the entire network," Jasmine said, her voice steady with purpose. "There are still too many people out there who think they can hide in the shadows. We need to expose everyone. We can't let anyone slip away." Karen's voice crackled on the other end of the line. "I've been working on it. There are some names I've tracked down. People who've been working in the background, people who helped Vince cover his tracks. But they're not going to go down without a fight. This is bigger than we thought." Jasmine nodded, though Karen couldn't see her. "I know," she said, "but we have to do this. It's the only way to make sure this never happens again." Over the following weeks, Jasmine and Karen worked tirelessly, combining their efforts to gather evidence, organize their resources, and coordinate with other trusted allies. They knew they were on the verge of something monumental, but the risks were higher than ever. Every move had to be calculated. Every decision weighed carefully. But Jasmine didn't hesitate. She had come too far to back down now. The final breakthrough came one evening, when Jasmine received an encrypted message that would change everything. The message contained names, locations, and a wealth of information that would finally expose the true extent of the network that had been operating in the shadows. It was the missing link they had been waiting for. With this new information, Jasmine knew it was time. She couldn't wait any longer. She couldn't afford to give them a chance to regroup or run. The moment had arrived to bring everything to light. Jasmine set the plan into motion. She contacted the right people, secured a platform to release the information, and made sure every piece of evidence was in place. She worked through the night, coordinating the final steps of the operation, ensuring that the world would see what she had uncovered. When the moment came, the world was ready. The story broke. The names were released. The global network that had supported Vince Moretti's empire was exposed, and the people who had been operating in the shadows were brought into the light. Jasmine watched as the media reacted, as the stories flooded news outlets, as the world began to see the truth. The magnitude of what she had accomplished hit her all at once. She had taken down an empire, dismantled a network of corruption that had stretched across borders, and exposed the people who had thought they were untouchable. But as the dust began to settle, Jasmine knew this wasn't the end. There would be more battles, more challenges. The fight for justice wasn't over. But for the first time in a long while, Jasmine felt a sense of peace. She had done it. She had made the impossible possible. And now, she was ready for whatever came next.